Michelle asked, this might be a dumb question. There are no dumb questions.
Yes, thank you.
So no worries if you don't want to answer it, but I'm working with a person who had a severe TBI who can't talk. Was there ever a time where you couldn't talk? If so, what was something you were wanting to tell people when you couldn't while recovering? That's a good question.
That's a great question. And it's
Yeah.
actually, it depends on the level that somebody can't communicate because we don't need our voice to communicate. For example, I couldn't speak for months. I was, my hand was stuck like this. I was breathing through a tube in my neck and I couldn't talk. Maybe you guys can see the scar. A little bit,
hmm
a little bit.
Looks pretty darn good, man.
It's pretty, yeah, I know. I'm kind of bummed about it. It's like all my buddies have tattoos and I have like the coolest tattoo, but it's fading. And it's not like I know it's touched up, you know. This one has a lot of meaning behind it. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So,
6 years in one day. Well, I don't know when they put that in, but
yes, that's a good point. I do. I know exactly when they put it. No, I'll
yeah,
get
you would know better than I do.
it.
But sorry.
So yes, it depends on how much they can't communicate, whether they can communicate or whether they can just not talk. So maybe you can answer that, but I'll go on this in the meantime. So when we can't talk, we can communicate in so many different ways. So I wrote, and sometimes we can't write. So I also mouthed words, and my friends became really good at understanding, reading my lips, you know?
Is
And
there anything like when you were trying to figure it out that you wanted to get out that you couldn't get out?
oh
You know,
man,
like before you like adapted to writing or
there was nothing more frustrating than not being understood. And I feel for patients that cannot communicate. That has to be so hard. And one of the best books I've ever read is written by Jean-Dominique Bauby. It's called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And are you familiar with this, Ryan?
no, you have so many good books in your repertoire. I don't.
Read this book. It's only like 120 pages, and it is a gift to humanity. Here's the story. Jean-Dominique Bauby, he's a French journalist for Elle magazine. He did fashion journalism, and he's driving in his convertible, and he suffers a massive stroke on the road. Luckily, he pulled over and stopped, but he's just like, or seizure maybe, I'm actually not sure. But it knocked out his brainstem. And he had what's called locked-in syndrome, where he had no voluntary control over anything.
Mhm.
But nothing, right?
Typically, in locked-in syndrome, you can only move your eyes, correct?
There you go. There you go. This is what happened. The speech language pathologist who saw him, he calls her his guardian angel. And he only mentions her like twice in the book, but I know that she saved this man's life.
Oh
Because
man.
essentially he's locked in. He is completely aware, and this is where the title comes in, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, because he uses the analogy of like, it was like he was in a diving bell, which is essentially they put divers in this iron bell. Or you know what? I talk with my hands a lot, so there we go. Now you can see what I'm talking with. So this giant bell, and it goes down to the bottom of the ocean with the diver in it. So it's meant to like sink the diver, and the diver's in this bell. Can't do anything outside until the bell is released, right? So he said, it's like my control over my body and my external circumstances It was as if I was in a diving bell. Yet my mind was as free as a butterfly,
Wow.
meaning he could go anywhere in his mind. And so he wrote this book. This is how he wrote this book. His speech language pathologist was convinced that somebody was in there. Nobody else was because he couldn't move anything. And they developed a code because the only thing he could move was his right eyelid. That's it. And so she ordered the French alphabet in order of most commonly used letter to least commonly used letter, and would go down it and name each letter until he blinked. And then she'd write down that letter. And so
Oh
they
my gosh.
basically went through every letter of every word that he wanted to write, and he had to do it with her. So in the meantime, when he was not with her, he would plan, he would go over line for line, editing in his mind exactly what he wanted to say, because he knew he only got one chance to write this, you know, and this was his chance. And so he went through and wrote this entire book with his eyelid.
I gotta check this book out.
Check this book out. It's a gift to humanity. And
Crazy.
everybody else, please get that book, especially if you have a loved one who has trouble communicating or is not able to get some perspective of what it could potentially be like, and what could potentially be done to communicate, because there is nothing more frustrating than not being able to communicate.
Absolutely, man. That's crazy. Thanks for the info. That was a cool story, man. Lauren